Today we're reviewing the court's ruling filed on April 24, 2025 in the case of State of Idaho versus Bryan C. Kohberger, case number CR 0124316665 out of the 4th Judicial District in Ada County. In this order, the courts addressed the state's motions in limine specifically about whether certain text messages, conversations, and a 911 call can be admitted at trial. And this is going to disclose some very important information that we have not previously been aware of. Two surviving roommates at 1122 King Road, referred to as DM and BF, which is Dylan and Bethany, were present at the home the night of the tragic unaliving. DM reportedly saw a masked intruder inside the house, and she then began calling and texting the other roommates, including BF. However, it wasn't until approximately 8 hours later that BF ultimately called 911 using her own phone. Now, the state asked the court to allow into evidence the text messages between Dylan and Bethany, testimony about their conversations, and the 911 call itself. The state argued these communications are either, number one, not hearsay at all, or that they qualify under exceptions to the hearsay rule, like excited utterances or present sense impressions. And I'm going to go over the meaning of those two as we go along. The state also requested permission for the jury to have a transcript of the 911 call available to read while listening to the audio recording. Now, the defense representing Mr. Kohberger objected, and they challenged many of the communications opposing the use of the transcript. The court held a hearing on April 9th, 2025, and after considering the arguments, the court ruled as follows: that some parts of the 911 call include hearsay that is not admissible and must be redacted. We're going to go over each one of those. However, most of the 911 call, the text messages, and the conversations are likely admissible, so long as the proper foundation is laid at trial. And again, we're going to go over each aspect, and you're going to know which is admissible and which is not. So the transcript will be allowed, but only as a demonstrative aid to help the jury follow along and not as evidence itself. It's important to note that the court's specific rulings on each individual text message and each part of the 911 call are excluded at the end of the order, attached as A and B, which is at the end of these initial orders that we're going to go over today. Now, the state of Idaho moved to admit text messages, verbal statements, and the 911 call from surviving roommates DM and BF after the King Road unaliving. The judge finds that most communications are likely admissible with some redactions required. So the transcript of the 911 call will be, as you see here, this is just a small depiction of illustrating like what this is talking about here. The arrow on the left side where the footprint is going to be where Dylan's door is. And that is where she would have opened the door and seen the intruder. Now, the bigger arrow here is going to be around where the bathroom is and Xana's room, and that's going to kind of give you an idea of where Xana was probably standing, considering that Dylan heard it similar to being in the bathroom, which bathrooms usually have an echo. And then, so it's going to give as if she was standing right beside of the bathroom, which would have been nearest to Xana's room whenever she was initially attacked. So Xana would have been right there beside of the bathroom, which could have made maybe potentially an echo. So that is the arrow that's kind of pointing toward that area. Following the frantic calls and text messages between 4:22 a.m. and 4:26 a.m., DM continued trying to reach her roommate. She even attempted to contact Ethan via Snapchat, and we went over and read some of those. Now, while she was on her way, she decides that she's going to run down to Bethany's room. Okay, so while she's on her way there, that's when she noticed that Xana was lying on the floor of her bedroom, and her head was facing the wall, and her feet were pointed toward the door. So at that moment, Dylan thought that Xana was simply drunk and asleep on the floor. She had no indication that she had actually been unalived. So once Dylan reached Bethany's room, they locked the door behind them for safety, and together they made additional unanswered calls to other roommates. So at approximately 4:32 a.m., Dylan sent another desperate text to Kaylee that simply said, "Please answer," but again, there was no reply. So here's a depiction of Xana's room Ethan, from what we know, he was potentially on the bed. We don't know this to be a fact, but Zaina clearly was right where the arrow is. Now I circled where she would have potentially been if Dylan heard her coming from, as if she were in the bathroom. So Dylan would have potentially been standing right where I circled, and then she probably moved back as she seen the intruder, what have you. But where the arrow is potentially where Zaina would have been laying whenever Dylan ran down the stairs to Bethany's room.